Okay, so thanks everyone for joining us this week. If you were with us last week, thanks for coming back. And we apologize again for the audio issues. We hope that you received the recording of the webinar. It's on YouTube, and I'll send a link in the chat as well if you haven't seen the video already. And I just put in the chat as well the landing page in which you can find the video and a shorter version of the video, and also access the budgeting calculator so you can download a copy for yourself and start playing around with it. And then we'll also record this Q&A so that you can refer back to it in the future. We are joined today by Nadav and Aaron, the founders, the creators, the brains behind Blue and White Finance. If you haven't already seen the budget calculator, it is really an impressive tool and very comprehensive, and we think that you will all very much benefit from it. So they're going to answer as many questions as they can today. And we are also joined by the Director of Aliyah Engagement at Nefesh B'Nefesh Yisrael, and he will be here to help supplement those questions that are more Nefesh B'Nefesh or Aliyah oriented as opposed to financial budgeting related. Okay, so Nadav and Aaron, take it away.
Awesome. All right. So first of all, Sydney from Los Angeles. I'm also from Los Angeles, so I just want to give you a shout out there. We're going to jump in. The way we're going to kind of run things is we're going to focus first on questions directly related to the calculator. If there is time, that's kind of what the main focus of this Q&A is. If there's time, we're going to try and move on to some of the other questions around general financial topics. Certainly in the future, we're definitely open to doing more of these kind of things and talking about other general financial topics, but we really want to focus on this fantastic tool. So Nadav, a lot of people have submitted questions. People are submitting questions live. I'm going to throw questions at you, and we'll see if you can take us through these questions and help us better understand this amazing tool that you created. Let's start with currency. Right. We had a few questions that said, is this really only for Americans? Can you only work in dollars and shekels? And really the answer is no, not at all. This is developed, to help everybody from all over the world in all kinds of different currencies. Why don't you show us that and talk us through how to use it in different currencies and how to make it work for you wherever you're making Aliyah from or whatever currency you're used to.
Excellent. Sounds good. So first, hello, welcome. I'm currently in Australia, which means the time now is 5 a.m. So if I fall asleep on you, then you'll know why. But taking a look at that perspective of living in different countries and understanding currency in different ways, we can dive into the calculator itself and have a look at how it supports both inputting the data that you can enter in different currencies, as well as viewing the ultimate budget itself in different currencies. And so maybe because most people here are from the United States, let's start by having a look at the relationship between shekels and US dollars in the calculator itself. I'm going to share my screen so we can all look together at how the calculator works, and we'll play with that for 2 minutes. So you'll notice that by default, when you open up let's start from the simple view. When you open up the calculator and you have a look at the monthly summary, it tells us that this family is going to be spending in shekels about 26,000 shekels. Now, that is very useful for when you get here because you'll start thinking in shekels, things will be quoted to you in shekels. When you're planning, one of the first things you might want to do is select View Budget in US dollars. And as soon as you select that, everything updates. And then you can view the amounts both here in the pie chart and in the summary in US dollars. And in the same way, in the advanced budget, we can see all of the itemized sections here in US dollars as well. The other thing that you can do is you can answer questions in a different currency. Let's say you want to answer questions in shekels because perhaps somebody's told you what things cost in shekels. You'll see here that in the advanced budget, we have a number of items where you enter a shekel amount. We'll address this one down the road because there's been a few questions about it. But if you're going to purchase a property, how much money are you coming in with? That is something that you put a currency amount in. Or how much do you spend a month on subscriptions on Spotify, Audible, on other kinds of subscriptions that you may have. So when I selected shekels, it changed the calculator to allow me to answer the questions in shekels. And so to address Aaron, the question that came from the UK, if they were interested in answering questions in sterling and perhaps viewing the budget as well in sterling, then that's all they need to do. And then it's adjusted for them and their background and their knowledge. And you see here there are a whole range of different currencies. We try to cover the most common countries from which people are coming, including Brazil and Ethiopia and Russia and a number of other countries that we have a lot of olim in Israel who are coming from.
Yeah.
So the calculator is really built around currency support.
Yeah, I think it's really, this is a really important part of the tool, because so much about financial planning, you hear a lot when people talk about moving to Israel, is starting to think in shekels. And for those of us coming from a different country, that's very difficult. We're very used to how much things cost in dollars or sterling or wherever we're coming from, but starting to get used to things costing, how much do they cost in shekels? What should I expect my budget to be in the currency that I'm going to be living in? So this tool kind of gives you the option to move into that slowly. Start with your currency and see the output in the currency that you're going to be using, and really start to get used to shekels and whatnot. And I think that's a really powerful part of this tool.
And I'll just add in that I think we may have had a question about exchange rate. The exchange rate here is live, so it's pulling it all the time from the currency servers, essentially from Google Finance, and it updates.
Right. And it doesn't always work so well when the currency markets are closed, which is generally until Sunday night in New York. But it updates very, very regularly when the markets are live, and you're getting basically the live market rate with Google.
Yeah, it'll be close enough. And by the way, from a budgeting perspective, it's an important factor to think about. Just because it shows you a certain dollar amount here doesn't necessarily mean that's the dollar amount you'll end up spending, even if the budgetary items are correct, because currency can shift. Shifting currency can have a significant impact on your ability to afford, especially when you are relying either on a US dollar job or US dollar savings. And maybe that's something that if we get time towards the end, we'll talk more about managing.
Yeah. Okay. One of the other questions that we got a bunch of questions around was the locations. Obviously, it's difficult to address every single location in all of Israel. We tried to kind of develop groups around some of the most important locations in Israel that really give people a good sense. But maybe some of the other locations that came in that you might want to address: Ashkelon, Tveria, Ramat Beit Shemesh, things like that. Where do those fall in this broad categories?
Sure. So it looks like my share stopped. I'll just start that up again. The way that we built the calculator was that we created here 5 groups of different locations based on pricing around the country, and you can see that it roughly starts most expensive from Tel Aviv itself, and then as we get further out, the price of housing, both rental and purchasing, starts going down. This is a very tricky problem because we can't load in the data for every single city and every single neighborhood in every city. You can imagine that Jerusalem has a wide range, and so we try to get as close as possible. And this is a good opportunity to point out that the result of the budget that you see here is going to get you pretty close, but it's not going to be exactly accurate for everybody. And that's why what we recommend. I'll come back to the questions about those extra locations, but what I do recommend is after you've answered the questions and you've come up here with a budget, it's valuable to understand each of the categories that have been presented to you. So you can go through and you can rely on the numbers for the most part, but for the very large ones, like rent, for example, hopefully you're able to do some of your own research, to visit the community or speak to people that live in that community and get a better sense for, on the particular street, for the particular type of house or apartment that you're looking to live in, what does the rent cost? And if you get a different number to what appears here, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. Chances are the research that you've done is more accurate and more up to date, and you can you can factor that in. You could update the value here, but then you'll break the calculator and you won't be able to use it in the future if you try to run a different scenario. What I generally recommend is you can take the budget, select it, and copy it out to your own version, and then you can adjust some of the numbers where you have more specific information that's more relevant to your own circumstance.
Right.
But what we had is a few questions coming in saying, where does this city fit in? Where does that city fit in? So we've done some extra research on 4 different cities that we were asked about. The first one was Ashkelon, which unfortunately is a very interesting case these days because of the war and because of the rockets and what's going on. Ashkelon, in terms of pricing, tends towards, at the moment, the least expensive city. Tends towards group 5, but it is somewhere between group 5 and group 4. And is quite similar to Ashdod in terms of the range of difference between each of these categories. It is relatively similar to Ashdod, and it could also be that Ashdod in the current scenario, although I haven't checked this, isn't quite as expensive, especially for rental, because the demand has gone down,
Yeah.
hopefully temporarily, in some of these cities in the south. Tveria also is very similar pricing to Ashkelon, in the sense that it is group 5, it's closer to group 5, but on the higher end. And so we'd recommend to select group 5, but then also to test out group 4. Sometimes when you have cities that are in the middle, you can test out the difference between them just to get that range of what your budget might look like, depending on what exact property you end up renting or ultimately purchasing. And we'll run through purchasing perhaps right after this. We were asked about Givot Eden, which is a new community near Beit Shemesh, but there isn't a lot of public data around the pricing there, so weren't able to get a very good fix. But that's one where you'll probably want to do some of your own research. And Ramat Beit Shemesh, which is, I guess, somewhat a part of Beit Shemesh itself, it is. We would put it also in group 4 with Beit Shemesh, but again, the higher end, so maybe perhaps somewhere between group 4 and group 3. Let me show you under the hood, because some of you may be interested in seeing this data. When you select these groups, I'll show you what it does. Over here in parameters, we have all of the underlying knowledge of the calculator. And particularly for housing, it's interesting to have a look at, because you can see here, let's say you're interested in getting a 3-bedroom apartment and you want to rent. So you can see, just by looking at this table, the range of what rental prices are for a 3-bedroom apartment, from most expensive down to least expensive, depending on where you're living. And just these numbers themselves can really help you think about where you might want to live, where you may be able to afford to live. Because there's a wide range from 4,000 shekels up to 12,000 shekels. And as you select different groups, if you did select that you're looking to rent, these are the numbers that are going to be pulled in to the calculator. And similarly for buying, if you're looking to buy a place that is 3 bedrooms, you can see that the cost range is somewhere from 1.5 million shekels through to 4.5 million shekels. And these are the numbers that are pulled in. And then we do extra calculations to have a look at what the mortgage payment might be. And Aaron, I'll leave it to you to see where we should place kind of going into the mortgage calculation itself, but that's what we have under the hood.
Yeah, we're coming up on that discussion as well. Before we get to that, one thing that you could help clarify, we got a few questions about is to do with income. People ask, when you talk about income, which you're not really talking about in this calculator, but people kind of felt like you were talking about income. Are we accounting for taxes? Is this after-tax income? How would you explain that in terms of this calculator?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we did confuse you a little bit because over here we had used the word income, which we've now corrected. The calculator doesn't address income. The calculator focuses solely on expenses. And so if we have a look at the result here, you can see that it tells you that we've got fixed and variable expenses, so a total of 26,000 shekels of expenses. It also gives you the opportunity, and this is really an educational prompt, to enter how much do you want to be saving. Because if you are in the saving phase of your life, then it's something that you don't want to forget about. So over here, how much would you like to invest or save? for short and long-term needs, if you enter any values over here, let's do that together. Let's say we want to say $500 for short-term needs and $500 for long-term needs each month. Then if I come back up here to my monthly savings, then I can see that my expenses plus the amount that I'm looking to save every month comes to 30,000 shekels. Now, obviously, the question that you're asking yourself is, if you're working, is how do I then generate 30,000 shekels of net income after taxes? So that's a very important question, and it's not one that is here in this calculator. What we can show you, I'll stop my share for a moment and pull it up, is that Blue and White Finance has a calculator that you can use, and I'll drop this in the chat in a moment when I finish this question. Let me share my screen again. So this here is the Blue and White Finance employee net income calculator. So if you're coming to Israel and you're planning to become an employee, what you can do is you can enter in your gross salary that's being quoted to you from the company. You can enter in the number of tax credit points that you're going to get, which we won't get into now, but we've got a little cheat sheet over here. And after you make Aliyah, you get extra tax credit points, which reduce your tax burden. You get one of them in the first 12 months, and then it jumps up to 3, and you have them for the next few years. And so if, for example, I'm looking to, if here I have been quoted a 25,000 shekel salary, and I'll be getting 6 tax credit points, then I can see that my net income after taxes is 17,000. And so perhaps if I'm earning that and my spouse is earning that, then I've got a good idea of how I can bring in 30,000 to be able to support the budget, the expense budget, which we had a look at in the Oleh budgeting calculator. So that's the way that you can use these two in tandem. Now, if your income is coming from elsewhere, if you are self-employed, then that's another matter. Blue and White Finance also has a self-employed net income calculator, which we're releasing in January as part of a new course, which we're going to be releasing. And if you have questions about these things, you can feel free to get in touch with us, and we can point you to resources that can be helpful. But we'll share this link as well in the chat.
Great. Before we get into mortgage, one quick question around is automobile insurance included in the expenses when looking at cars? Is that taken into account in the calculator?
Sure. So let me just copy this. There it is. Okay, so that link now in the chat, if you open that up, then in the same way that you made a copy of the budgeting calculator, you can do the same thing for the employee net income calculator.
2 for the price of 1, two
will,
calculators. Everybody who came to this event.
And by the way, if you over here, you can see got the link to our website, bluewhitefinance.com/free. bluewhitefinance.com/free. Over there, you'll find we have a lot more tools and calculators and guides and other things that could be useful, all for free. I guess the website is free. So, yes, we have auto insurance. That is a thing in Israel. It is an important thing, and it's something that we've added into the calculator. You can find it under insurance. It's very likely you missed it because when you have a look at transport, you didn't see auto insurance. We happen to include it under insurance. So over here, vehicle insurance, you can see in this case, 358 shekel per month, or around about 4,000 shekels per year. You can see that's what, about $100, $100 US every month. Now, there is quite a range there. So it obviously depends on the type of car that you are purchasing. The calculator does adjust. So in the advanced budget, when you select the type of car, the size of car, the insurance will adjust. If I go down here to small car, you can see that the insurance reduced from 350 to 310 to 316. So that is coded in there. But one of the factors that's important to keep in mind, which we don't have here, is that if you're coming in and you're not able to prove a significant amount, Aaron may know the number of years, a significant amount of prior driving history in another country, and that means that you have to have your name on the insurance plan. We often have young people come in who who may have been driving for 10 years, but they were on their parents' insurance plans. They never had an insurance plan in their own name. When they first come, their insurance sometimes costs double what it would otherwise. Instead of 4,000, it might be 7,000 for the first few years, and that can be
I
quite.
believe it's a 3-year history, if I remember correctly. That's what they're almost always looking for.
It could be.
Yeah.
It could be. So, firstly, when you're coming in, you should bring proof of your driving history, and factor in that if you don't have proven driving history under your own name, you may have to add another 3,000 shekels a year to your budget.
Great. All right. Why don't we tackle the subject of mortgages? I think people had questions around how that fits into the calculator, how that's are mortgages fixed? When you're looking at it here, are there any lease to own options available? Why don't we start there, and then we'll tackle some of the other ones.
Sure. So this is obviously a tricky topic, which I'll try to explain in a simple way. If anyone wants to dive in further, we have an article on our site. I think it's called Aaron, how to build a plan to buy your first home.
How to build a simple plan to buy your
and
first home, right? Yeah.
How to build a simple plan. And that goes in depth into all the rules around mortgages and the limitations, because whereas in the United States, you can have a very low down payment. I think it's 10%, something like that, perhaps even less in some cases. In Israel, there are regulations in place to try to avoid the kind of the kind of crises that we've seen in the past in other countries, where people have gone underwater in terms of their mortgage. And in Israel, you have to have a minimum of a 25% down payment on a property. So let's say, for example, you're looking to buy a 2 million shekel property. That means you need to come in with 500,000 shekels of cash for the down payment. And it's important to remember as well that in addition to that cash that you need, there are also associated costs of buying. So there's the lawyer, and there's often a real estate agent, and there are purchase taxes, which start kicking in once the property costs more than 1.9 million shekels. Then we start having purchase tax that kicks in and starts becoming significant once we start getting to 3 and 4 million shekel properties. So all of that has to be taken into account. So what does this calculator do? It allows you to enter how much money you're coming in with. So let's say you have, switch it to mortgage, to buying. And at the moment, let's see what we're on. We're buying a 3-bedroom place in Modi'in, for example. So that place is going to be costing us 2.9 million shekels. Okay, I'm going to just switch everything to shekels so that I can keep consistent. We don't have to all think about currency exchange rates in our head. And I'm also actually going to keep the numbers round. So let's switch. Let's say I'm going to buy a 3-bedroom place in Haifa. Okay, excellent. So we're looking now to buy a 2 million shekel property. And let's say I'm coming in with, what do we say? We said 25% plus about 7% for costs. So I'm coming in with 700,000 shekels. Okay, so I have 700,000 shekels that I'm coming in with. About 600 of that's going to be used for the down payment. I'm going to have a mortgage of about 1.4 million shekels. What the calculator does is it takes that 1.4 million shekels that I'm going to take out as a mortgage, and it converts it into a monthly payment. How does it do that? It uses the average interest rates that are being provided right now for mortgages. In Israel, that is at the moment around about 5%. It does depend on a range of factors. So it depends on how long the mortgage is going to be. It depends on what percentage you're putting down. But we use the average rate, and we say for a maximum term mortgage, a 30-year mortgage, how much does the payment come out to be? So those are the inputs. The 1.4 million shekel that I'm taking out as a loan, as a mortgage, the interest rate, and how long it is, and by default it's 30 years here, and it calculates the mortgage payment. So that would be 7,800 shekels a month. And so you can see that already is a reasonable payment, because if I was to rent a similar place, well, it's actually quite a bit more. If I was to rent a similar place, it would cost me 5,500. To buy that place with this much down and the rest as a mortgage would cost me about 7,800 per month. And then to address the question as to whether that's fixed or not, in Israel, you can essentially choose how much of the mortgage you want to be fixed and how much you want to be variable. And that will affect the rates and will affect the cost. And there are some regulatory limitations around how much of it you can make variable in order to reduce risk. But that's a little bit beyond the scope here of the calculator itself.
Awesome. By the way, I just want to mention for everybody who's going through this, you guys can look at the Q&A, the live Q&A, and you can upvote questions, which means if you see a question that somebody else asked that you think is, we're obviously not going to get to all these questions. So we want, if you think there's a great question out there that you want us to ask, feel free to upvote a question and we'll go from there. I just want to, let's go to that one. Okay, so somebody asked about buying on paper. They'll be renting for 2 years in Israel after making it out before new apartment is completed. So they want to they want to account for the fact that they're going to be renting at the same time as they're going to have to be, dealing with that mortgage. How would you say the best way for them to?
Sure. So just in terms of that scenario, it's obviously tricky. I've got lots of clients that are in that scenario, and requires some very good planning. Because if you don't have the cash flow to cover both, then you'll have to come in with some savings to cover the double hit of rent and mortgage at the same time. I would recommend what I mentioned before in terms of making your own copy of the budget. So you'd come in here in the advanced tab, you'd highlight the whole budget, you'd select copy, and then you can open up your own spreadsheet in Excel or in Google Sheets. When you go into your own spreadsheet, what you want to do is you want to say paste special and then values, because otherwise you'll be pasting these formulas that won't work over there. So you
can also just make a new tab with that, meaning keeping the original everything intact, but making a new tab. Would that also work?
Yeah, so I can show you that here. That's a good idea. So I press plus down here to make a new tab. I'm going to select my whole budget and copy. And then in my new tab, I can come here and go paste special values. Yeah. And so now, well, the monthly totals won't update here, but you can kind of manage that yourself. You've got all the different items here, all the costs here. You can add in yourself. Let's say you're going to have a mortgage payment of 6,000, and then review the numbers and manage that yourself as well, separately. The other option, if you know you've finished using the automation of the calculator, is you can just type 6,000 over here, and it'll break the mortgage calculation, but you may not need that. So that might be simpler for me.
Right. This tool can be really great at getting you started and getting you kind of a real good foundation, and then you can take it to the next level and really adapt it to your specific needs. Yisrael, can I bring you in for a second? I think one of the questions that's
sure, I'm here.
Great. That's been asked. Maybe you can break down a little bit more for us about the starting costs, where people ask about pre-aliyah expenses around lifts and fees for apostles and documentation that they need to get accepted to Aliyah. Why don't you touch on that?
Okay. So we'll start with the lift because that's the most common one. You want to be in touch with the shipping company. The shipping company will come to your house and they'll give you an estimate based on what you want to move to Israel. You want to ship your whole home. They will box your home, put it in a container, and bring it to your location in Israel, door-to-door service. That's the service you're paying for. Now, the cost of that service can be anywhere from, in our past experience, it could be anywhere from $3,000 up to $10,000. Again, it's based on volume. You have a container. The more you fill up in that container, the more of your home you're bringing, the more it's going to cost. But that's the average cost. Minimum $3,000, maximum $10,000, $100,000 if you're obviously living a lot of things. So that is the general answer with that. With regards to documentation and apostilles, the general cost, again, if you want to get an apostille for your birth certificate, depending on, whether you're in New York or California, it can range from anywhere from $18 to $25 per apostille. Okay, if you go and do it yourself. If you employ a apostille service company, the companies will charge anywhere from $100 to $120 per apostille. It's significantly more expensive. However, sometimes if you're living in New York, but you were married in California, and then divorced in Florida, and then remarried in Illinois, and you don't want to be doing the running around, it's worth that investment of that cost, because they'll go and take care of it for you on your behalf. That's pretty much it. That's the cost of the pastilles. The cost of getting your birth certificate from the vital records office. If you lost your birth certificate or you lost your civil document, again, it's generally about $20. So it's not expensive from that perspective. The main expense that most people incur when they're looking to make Aliyah, pre-Aliyah, is the shipping costs. In the Aliyah benefit world, the government gives you a benefit where you're not paying tax. The government doesn't charge you tax. The customs authority will not charge you tax for what you import to Israel. So you can ship your whole house, your appliances, your personal belongings. The government is not charging you a tax. That's an Aliyah benefit you get. However, you have to pay for the financial cost of shipping all your things to Israel. And again, you employ a shipping company. We have a list of different shipping companies that we provide as a courtesy. You have to be in touch with them directly, do your homework, compare the prices, but they will come to your house and they'll give you an estimate on the cost.
Awesome. That definitely is a great rundown. So I think before we jump into some of there's a lot of other topics that are being brought up here. I want to do one more with regards to the calculator, specifically around somebody who's not going to be driving. Very common. Yerushalayim, they're in Tel Aviv. They don't want to deal with the cars, and very often that's a great idea. The amount of money you can save by not having a car in a city is tremendous. How does the calculator account for public transportation and maybe taxi use, monthly bus passes and things like that?
Yeah, great question. So let's take a look at that. As Aaron said, it can be a great move to not get a car if that's something you can avoid. A car, to give you a bit of a sense, a car will cost you in Israel usually between 2,000 to 3,000 shekels per month, all in, when you have a look at the car cost itself and the gas and the maintenance. So avoiding that can really help. It's a headache. It can really be a headache. A lot of people have asked, perhaps just another question was about not cars, but some people have asked also about leasing. In Israel, because cars are so expensive to buy, you'll find that any kind of method that you use to get a new car is going to work out to be quite expensive. So when you lease a new car in Israel, and you do the math over time as to how much that's costing you, it's essentially the cost of a new car over time and the depreciation of that, plus the interest rates on a loan that you would have to take out to get that car. And by far the cheapest and most effective way of using cars in Israel is to buy secondhand cars that are 3-4 years old, keep them for a number of years, and then to cycle through those. When you do the math around how much that saves, it can be over the long term. If you're really investing that difference, I think we calculated it can be like 500,000 shekel savings over 30 years. So if there are more questions, we can address that. But let's look at what the budget, the calculator does for those people that don't want a car. So let's take a look. So we're in the advanced budget where we address everything to do with transport, and we come down here to the transport section. So step number 1 is to say no car. So we're going to switch how many cars will you need to 0. So as soon as I switch that to 0, it now ignores everything else that I've answered around car. And if I go to transport, I'll see that my car lease, my service, my gas is all 0. I don't know why that's 8 shekel. I'll have to check that out. Anyway, but we can ignore those 8 shekel. Then we want to come down over here, still in the transport section, and we can answer how much we're going to be using public transport. How many adults are going to be using public transport regularly, and how much, and how many occasionally? And the same for children, how many will be using it regularly and occasionally? So you can see at the moment, my default setting is that we have one adult using and one child using public transport regularly. And the cost of that is 476 shekel per month. But let's have a look at the underlying, if I can find it. Let's have a look at kind of what the cost is, because this will interest some of you that are going to be relying on public transport. We can see the cost of, here it is, the cost of public transport in Israel. So it does depend on where you're traveling, but the prices have been somewhat unified across the country. Certainly in terms of buses, trains, there is still some difference. And I used here somewhat of an average. You can expect that an adult traveling regularly on public transport through the month cost you around about 300 shekels. That includes some use of the train as well. And children or others that have inherent discounts. So seniors, once you're over 70, if I remember correctly, with a new system, I don't think you pay at all. Someone might be able to correct me on that, but I think that's the new system as of last year. But there are others that have discounts as well. Often you're paying 50%. You can see there kind of the discount between the adult and the child. And those are the kind of costs that you should expect. You can say it's a fraction of what a car might cost you.
Okay, while you're there in parameters, can you address also private health insurance?
Sure.
And that's accounted for?
Yeah. So in Israel, as we know, we have a very, very, very good public health system, and you don't necessarily need private health insurance, although it is recommended and something that I often recommend to clients. When it comes to public health, you get through Bituach Leumi, you get most of the core of what you need. You can then upgrade that for between 50 to 100 shekels a month through your Kupat Cholim, right, through your public healthcare service. But in addition, there are options for taking out private healthcare. Now, why would you do that? There's a lot of modularity, but there are two main levels of private healthcare that you might want to take out. The fundamental one covers very severe and catastrophic occurrences. So if you need to travel overseas to receive surgery that can't be done in Israel, or travel overseas to receive a transplant, or if you need access to medicines that are outside of the public healthcare basket, those items are relatively cheap. It can cost you tens of shekels, depending on your age, every month. But if you want to go more comprehensive, you want to be able to go to a private surgeon, you want to be able to go to a private specialist to get an opinion, you want to have physiotherapy included, those kind of things. If I scroll down here to the costs of health insurance, then you can, I put here, like, again, this is very much an average, an estimate of what it might cost to get comprehensive private health insurance, including the private surgeries and the like. So children are relatively cheap. Younger adults should expect to pay in the region of 100 shekels. Those in their 20s should be a bit less. This example here is for somebody aged 40. And you may have to get 2 or 3 quotes to be able to get a price like this, but this is a good target price. It obviously goes up as you get towards age 60. Here, for an adult, age 60, you would expect it to cost you closer to about 300 shekels a month. And the other thing that's important to point out, that with private health insurance, they often won't cover pre-existing conditions. That's something that you need to look into and use a good agent to see what kind of access you can get. As opposed to the public health system, where if you're making aliyah even with pre-existing conditions, those have to be covered by the Kupat Cholim, by the public system. So that all is also integrated here into the calculator in the budget itself.
Great. Okay, I'm going to run through a few of there's been a bunch of general questions around investing, saving, retirement, and things like that. I'm going to run through some of these generally. Obviously, everything we say is not specific tax, investment, or legal advice. This is all just very general. We're trying to touch on these topics, but please speak to a specific expert to address your personal situation. Question number one, could you suggest funds for long-term investments that do not fall into the category of PFIC? So just to give a little summary, again, very brief, there's lots of resources that you can read about this on our website. In general, when somebody makes aliyah from the United States, you still have to worry about the US tax code. Even though you left the US, you still have to worry about the US tax code. And certain Israeli investments can be a problem for you as a US person. If you're an American citizen and you're still paying your US taxes and you invest in certain Israeli investment products, that can cause you US tax headaches. And therefore, in general, it is better for long-term investments for you to be made using US domiciled funds, US domiciled mutual funds and ETFs and stocks and bonds, and less so to do so directly in Israeli investment funds, because Israeli investment funds can cause you problems with your US tax code. So in general, what we encourage is for an American that wants to invest for the long term, is to continue to leverage US platforms. It's very easy to do so even once you make aliyah. You can continue to do so from Israel. You can even get access to US markets via an Israeli bank. That's generally the most expensive way to do so, so we wouldn't recommend it. But just so you realize, you can get access to the US markets, you can get access to US investment products, even once you move to Israel, and there's different ways to do that. And that tends to be a more prudent strategy for an American making aliyah. There's a ton to say on the topic, so I don't want to get too down that rabbit hole. Maybe we can have
Aaron,
a whole.
what would be the article you recommend to start from on our site if you're looking to?
Yeah, you can check out
look more
what
into that.
Americans can and can't invest in. That's an article on our site which really talks about the problems and the different products that are a problem, that are very common for Israelis, that are a problem for Americans. And it talks about what are things that you can access no problem even when you move to Israel, and how to navigate that whole issue. So that should be a really good starting point. We have a free little class also that you can join, and I give a little bit longer rundown of the whole PFIC issue, but that's an important thing to throw out. I'll jump to the next question because I don't want to spend too much time on this. Income taxes on retirement income. In general, income taxes, retirement, and I assume they mean retirement savings or retirement products, in general is very favorable in Israel. For example, somebody who makes aliyah from the US and receives Social Security, they do not pay taxes on Social Security. Now, that's probably not going to be not necessarily the case if you stay in the US. If you make aliyah because of the treaty between the US and Israel, you will not pay taxes on your Social Security, which is a significant benefit. There are specific rules that govern the how taxes work on all distributions from, let's say, a 401k and IRA. For the basics, you can think about the first 10 years of aliyah, there is no Israeli tax on your foreign investments, including your IRAs. If you're withdrawing money from an IRA, from 401k, from 403b, from any retirement account, you're exempt from paying tax on that in Israel during the first 10 years of aliyah. That's considered foreign source income. That's not, once your 10 years of aliyah are over, it's taxed generally at a favorable rate. It's taxed not at the Israeli tax rate, but the rate of the home country. So if you're withdrawing from a US retirement account, just as an example, it would be taxed based on the US tax rates and not based on the Israeli ones. In many cases, Israeli tax rates are
But to
higher.
clarify, Aaron, you're paying that, whatever the rate is, you're paying it to Israel. You're not paying it to America.
Yes, exactly. Once the 10 years is over, Israel becomes kind of the primary first stop for a lot of investment income. For example, capital gains, you're going to first pay to Israel, and then the remainder would, if there is a remainder, would be paid to the US. There's a whole treaty that governs how you're taxed, and it's a little bit more in depth than we're going to go into now. But the general thing I'd want to say is that retirement income does have advantages for somebody living in Israel, and that's something to point out. If I transfer money from U.S. savings account to an Israeli bank, do I have to pay taxes on the transfer? So generally, you are not taxed on transferring money. There's no, you're taxed for income that you earn. You're taxed on your earnings. So just because you make a transfer does not mean you have to pay taxes. If you happen to withdraw that money from an investment and you realized investment returns, you realized gains when you made that transfer, when you took the money out of the account, then there certainly will be taxes involved. If you're just making a transfer from one bank to another bank, there should be no taxes involved. It does not mean your Israeli bank won't ask you lots of questions. I promise you they will, because that's what they do. That's just kind of a fact of life here. But that does not mean you owe taxes on that money to any country. So that's important to point out. Good emergency savings amount to have for a family of two. Nadav and I just had a good question on that.
I pulled up the image if we want to share that.
Awesome.
Okay. So, I mean, this is a very common question, not just a question that we get, but also whenever we work with clients, it's fundamental to building a financial plan. We have to work out how much money we should keep in an emergency fund, keep in some kind of cash vehicle that isn't invested and isn't subject to market risk. And you may be familiar that often in the US, we speak about 3 to 6 months of emergency fund. Here in Israel, now it depends on your circumstance, so let's take all of this with a grain of salt. But let's pull it up. I assume you can see that now. Here in Israel, I generally recommend to most people to think about a 2 to 4 month emergency fund, and this is for people that are working. Retirement might be somewhat of a different situation with how you manage your withdrawal rate and your different cash buckets and different cash and investment buckets. For somebody who's working, we generally find that between 2 and 4 months worth of expenses can be a reasonable emergency fund size. So let's say, for example, that the calculator tells you that your household expenses are going to be 20,000 shekels for a month. That means that you're going to want to plan to keep in cash at any one point in time between 40 and 80,000 shekels here in Israel. And that's also something you can start building up before you come. We have an article on the site. Aaron will be able to tell us the name of it. I think it's the Revolut article. Some advice on how to start building up shekel savings even before you arrive, which can help reduce your exchange rate risk if the exchange rate changes. It's kind of right before Aliyah. And you can see here that in a situation where you have double income, you have other investments and other savings that are available and liquid, you may be able to get by with only 2 months of an emergency fund. And in a situation where you have more risk, perhaps you don't have other things to fall back on, maybe you're relying on one income, and so if you lose that job, then you'll have to withdraw from your emergency fund much faster, and you may want to be more towards 4 months of an emergency fund. And the reason why we feel that you're going to have somewhat less of what you might have otherwise had in the US is because there are a lot more social nets here to catch you if something happens. So here in Israel, if you've held a job for a year and you're fired, then you get 30 days notice. You get paid out a certain severance amount, which is something that you could use, although we don't always recommend using it if you don't need it. If you lose your job, then there's unemployment pay at a reasonable level, often around 50% of your income, for a significant number of months while you're looking for a new job. And as we know, we've also got the public healthcare system. So a lot of major medical costs that you might incur, in many cases, are covered by public healthcare system or otherwise perhaps by insurance. And so this is a little bit of guidance. Doesn't mean it's exactly right for your situation, but hopefully it's helpful.
Right. Having emergency savings is often about balancing between what's optimal and how you can really, accelerate your financial goals while also having peace of mind and making sure you're comfortable with what you have saved and how you're addressing anything that could happen to your family, God forbid, or even not, just something great that you decide you need to pay for. Just having that extra savings sometimes makes people feel better. So it's not there's no perfect formula. It's 2 to 4 months, 3 to 6 months. We're all just trying to give you some general tools here. Okay, the last question on investing that I'm going to address here is about Roth IRA. Roth IRA is not taxed in America when you withdraw it. Will it be taxed in Israel, even though it's after tax dollars? The simple answer to that question is it depends which accountant you ask. There is no consensus on this issue in Israel. A Roth IRA is not really, there's nothing in Israeli law that defines what a Roth, that relates to what a Roth IRA is. And therefore, there's plenty of accountants that are willing to take aggressive positions and say, well, it's tax-free in the USA, so it's tax-free in Israel. There's plenty of accountants that think that's terrible. It's a ridiculous idea. Of course, it's a taxable account. We obviously can't give you advice on that, except for finding an accountant that you're comfortable with the position that they're taking when that comes. It's a tough issue because people want to plan, and generally a Roth IRA is a fantastic option for many people in starting off early in the US. It's difficult. It's definitely a risk choosing that type of account when you're planning on making Aliyah, and there's no definitive answer for when you retire, what the law will be, what the status of the law will be in terms of how it's enforced and how it's treated. I have never gotten a satisfactory answer from the many accounts that we have spoken to about this issue. And I wish I had a better answer for you, but that's the main gist. Why don't we talk a little bit more about some of these other general topics? Maybe you want to take some of these, Nadav? You have
Sure,
one
I'll just cover a few of them quickly. In the household family situation section, in the simple budget where you're kind of selecting how many people you have in your house, does one include oneself? The answer is yes. You have to include everybody that's in the household. So that's that one. Is home insurance higher because of the war? I don't know whether there's been a change. My best guess is that we haven't yet seen a change, and probably only would if there was significant risk around the country because of the war. In general, if I understand correctly, the Israeli government covers any direct damage.
Yeah, damage is covered. Right, it's covered by the tax authority. So I don't think the insurance companies are bearing. There has been obviously significant damage, but that's not covered by the insurance companies. That's my understanding.
Yeah, and so I would assume that we won't necessarily see. We've got a few good questions here about including senior discounts for public transport. Maybe that's something we should note down, Aaron. We can have think about including that in a future version of the calculator. As a very good question, which I don't know that I've got the answer to. Is it better to buy or rent in Israel?
It depends.
I hate when you get on a financial call and the person just says it depends. Pay me for a consult. With buying and renting, it depends on a lot of personal circumstances, particularly how much money you're coming in with. I think that the first thing you want to address is, can I buy? Buying can be tricky here. You have to come in, as we saw in the beginning, with a significant down payment, a lot of money up front, and then be able to manage the mortgage. So if buying is something that you're interested in and you want to do so, then you need to address that question first: can I buy? And only then look at rent. If, on the other hand, both of them are fine solutions for you, then it takes quite a bit of research to have a look at both scenarios, have a look at the impact on your budget, think about how that impacts your lifestyle and also your long-term prospects in terms of housing stability. And only after looking at all of those factors can we really address a question like that. Unemployment benefits. So this is outside of the calculator, but I mentioned before that when you lose your job in Israel, you get unemployment benefits. Now, Aaron, you can also jump in here. Let's start from this. So if you're employed by an Israeli company, then you get unemployment benefits. If you're self-employed in Israel, then there isn't an unemployment benefit scheme for self-employed, although there's been a lot of lobbying to push for that over the years, but it has never come through. If you're employed by a foreign company, and assuming that you're paying Bituach Leumi, do you know, Aaron, whether you would get employment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on how you're structured and whether or not you're paying into the system. Bituach Leumi. You'll see on our website a specific article on this. What's it called again? If you're working for a U.S. company while living in Israel, specifically on this topic, and you'll see that there's many different ways of kind of setting this up. And it really depends how you're setting this up. Just because you're working for a U.S. company does not mean you're not paying into the Israeli tax system. If you're living in Israel, you're required to be paying taxes in Israel. If you're working while breathing Israeli air, you're required to be paying Israeli income tax, even if you're within your 10-year of Aliyah or anything like that. So keep that in mind. And then once you've developed and figured out your structure, that's going to be part of your calculation in terms of how you set it up. Do you want certain Israeli benefits built into your employment? Do you want to structure it a different way for some other advantages? It's really not a simple question. Unfortunately, a lot of people are looking to this. They want to work remotely from Israel. There isn't like a simple structure that you can just keep working as and everything will be the same. It's a little bit more complicated because you've got taxes in the US, you've got taxes in the Israel, you've got different payroll systems and different payroll taxes to worry about. So there is a little bit more legwork you're going to have to do in terms of getting in touch with an Israeli accountant and structuring it properly so that you're built in the most optimal way to be able to maintain that job, that your company is happy with that structure and is willing to continue employing you. These are all important things to take into account. And one of those details is unemployment pay and different Bituach Leumi benefits.
Yeah, which by the way is relevant to a number of other areas as well. We've seen recently with young men being called up, not just men, but young people being called up into the army, depending on how they're structured, when they're working for a foreign company, some of them may have been able to receive the correct amount of pay for their Miluim service, for their Army Reserve service, but some of them that aren't registered as paying everything that's required in Israel don't necessarily receive the pay that they need to cover their salaries. So it is important to take these into account when you're deciding how to structure yourself. And I saw a great question here.
As far as HOA-like fees when buying a home, certainly if you buy a home you buy an apartment in a building, you're generally going to have HOA fees. Eminent domain, that's a bit of a complicated question. It's very different in Israel than the US. My understanding is, as far as legal ownership, you actually have stronger legal ownership in the US than you do in Israel. Israel, you get certain rights to use the land or certain rights to have the land for 100 years or all kinds of different ownership depending on where you're buying. It's very, obviously, this is a free country and there's many safeguards to make sure that if you buy your land, that land belongs to you. But there's all kinds of different legal structures that are very different than what you might have had in the US. So I don't think we're the best people to get into that, but any real estate lawyer will be able to walk you through kind of the status of your property that you're interested in and what legal ownership type you'll be entitled to when you purchase that property.
Now, there's a question here: is the mortgage interest on an Israeli mortgage deductible either in Israel or in the US? So I can answer for Israel. And again, for all of these kind of tax-related questions, this is our understanding. We're not tax professionals, and you certainly should clarify this with tax professionals because we could be wrong in some circumstances. My understanding is that if you're self-employed, then there are some circumstances, depending on a range of factors and whether you're working out from home or not, where the mortgage interest can be deductible, but not in every circumstance. When you're an employee, then typically in Israel, the income tax system is very different to the US and to other countries. For regular employees, they almost never file a tax return because the tax is calculated by their employer, taken directly out of payroll, is in many circumstances accurate. And so nobody thinks about tax. And mortgage interest, I don't believe, is deductible in that scenario. Aaron, in the US, can you?
I believe, again, double check this with your US accountant, but I believe it can be deductible depending on the specific circumstances. Obviously, only in the case that you're itemizing your deductions, you're not using the standard deduction, which many cases, especially people living in Israel, are using the standard deduction. So it's not a simple answer, but it's definitely possible and something worth talking with your accountant. I see one person raise their hand and wants to do a live question. Svi and Rachel Roseman, do you guys want to talk? Should I give you the floor? Let's try one live question before we wrap it up. All right, we'll give you guys a chance to unmute yourselves if you want and ask a live question. And while we're doing that, let's grab another. Svi and Rachel, do we have you on the line? Maybe. All right, it was a good try.
We'll give them a chance to see if they appear.
Really great audience, all you guys just sticking on this whole time to hear us babble through all these questions. So appreciate you guys turning out. I hope to do lots more of these. We have any?
Let's
should we
maybe
wrap
address
up?
the.
Yeah.
Maybe as a last question, Aaron, do you want to talk about if you have stock when you make Aliyah, and then you sell that
Tesla,
in the future?
nice. So yeah, if you sell stock online as a citizen of Israel, assuming you're within your 10 years of Aliyah, specifically with Tesla, you would not pay any tax in Israel because that is foreign sourced income. You wouldn't even report it in Israel. Assuming you're after 10 years of Aliyah, you would definitely be required to report that and pay taxes, capital gains in Israel. In general, capital gains are taxed first in Israel after 10 years of Aliyah, first in Israel, and then any remainder would be taxed in the US if there is a remainder, which means, for example, if the US taxed at 35% and Israel taxed at 25%, which is not the case, but if it was, for example, then you'd first pay 25% to Israel, and then you'd pay 10%, the gap between that 35 and the 25, you would pay that remaining to the US. That's kind of how the treaty works. You don't pay double tax on anything. You pay the higher rate. So you pay the total amount, and that means sometimes your tax bill can be split up between the two countries. And that's specifically for the US, but if you're within your 10 years of Aliyah, Israel is not in the picture. You do not pay foreign, you don't pay any tax on foreign source income.
But also, Aaron, after the 10 years, it's a pro rata calculation in terms of
good point.
How long?
Exactly. So after the 10 years, if you're trying to explain the pro rata is going to be a bit complicated, but in general, those 10 years of Aliyah that you held the stock during your first 10 years of Aliyah, that is taken into account when calculating your Israeli tax bill. So you're not going to be paying tax for those 10 years. Let's say you sell it in your 13th year, you are going to be paying tax on those 3 years that you held the stock after the 10 years. But for those first 10 years that you held the stock, when you're in Israel, you will not be paying that portion of the tax to Israel. And again, the exact calculations are a bit complicated. You're going to have to work that out with an accountant, but that's the basic gist of how it works.
And it's often very relevant. I had a client recently, they were selling stock in the US to buy a property in Israel. And they were like on the cusp of their 10-year date. And there's a lot of fear that if you kind of breach that date, then it can have significant impact. So you have to discuss, you should consult with an accountant before you get to the 10 years. But in most
especially
cases,
if you're not
it shouldn't
American. Yeah.
Especially if you're not American. In most cases, it shouldn't be a cliff.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not like you fall off a cliff at the end of the 10 years, which is the case with some other benefits.
Yeah. All right. We're going to wrap it up. One question about inheritance tax here. General Israel doesn't have an inheritance tax, but there's certainly a lot of nuances there. So you really got to talk to an accountant about the specifics. The US, of course, does have an inheritance tax, with certain exemptions that are changing in not so long, in a few years from now. So it's a fluid question, and there's no simple answer. In general, Israel doesn't have an inheritance tax. If you inherit an apartment, you wouldn't be taxed, but again, there's differences there depending on who's inheriting it, what the status of the yeah.
Aaron, if I can just jump in
Excellent.
for a minute,
Yeah,
someone had a
please,
question previously, and the question was, um, is it that they've heard that it's better to make Aliyah before the age of 62? So I just wanted to that's a common question. I wanted to
Yeah.
clarify it. It's a lot of people, there's rumors out there that if I make Aliyah before at a certain age, it's financially better for me. So from the Aliyah perspective, what that's referring to is the following. If someone makes Aliyah before the age of retirement, according to the Israeli standard right now, the age of retirement for a male is 67, for a female it's 65, but there's some nuances according to that. Then Bituach Leumi National Insurance Ministry offers a some kind of like it's almost like a welfare benefit for those individuals, and it's what it is. It's a welfare benefit for individuals who are on the low income. So it's not an automatic thing. A lot of times people have this misconception: oh, if I come before retirement, I'm going to get this extra money. No, it's designed to help Olim who come before the age of retirement that are on the low income and they need this additional assistance. And when you apply for it, you have to pass an income test. So you have to show the ministry, all the income that you may be receiving, income abroad, etc. And based on that income, they'll determine whether you qualify for it or not. So again, it's not something that's automatic. You have to apply for it, and if you are earning a certain amount of money, in which most Northern Americans do, usually I'd say anything more than $1,000, then most likely you will not qualify for that benefit. And that's a benefit that is available to individuals who make Aliyah before retirement.
Amazing. So I just want to take this last second to, first of all, thank Nefesh B'Nefesh for all the support, all the resources, and putting this tool together and creating these events and helping build these tools. Just really important that with Aliyah applications going way up now, and so many people think about it, that they have the resources, they have the tools to really not just jump on a plane and come here, but also plan financially and plan to have a great Aliyah, an Aliyah that's successful. And none of these tools are meant to sugarcoat anything or anything like that. We're trying to give people real tools and real information, and that's really what Nefesh B'Nefesh is so great at just being with you every step of the way. And I really want to thank Nadav, who put hours into creating this tool. I don't know, for all of you guys who have just got playing with it, it's a very sophisticated tool with just loads of research and loads of information. So really kol hakavod to you, Nadav, for all the research and programming work that you put into this. And we're looking forward to seeing a lot of Olim benefit from this. And Rina, Nadav, you want to say anything? And Rina, do you want to close it up?
I'll leave it to Rina, but thanks everyone for joining. Thank you all for joining. Yeah, we appreciate the questions and the ability to clarify and to bring even more information about both the financial background, the financial process underlying Aliyah, and the calculator itself to Olim.
Thank you to all three of you so much for answering all these questions. Very thorough, very comprehensive. Again, everybody, check out the landing page on the Nefesh B'Nefesh website, on the Blue and White Finance website, and we'll be sending out a recording of this Q&A webinar. So you'll receive it hopefully by the end of tomorrow. And it will also be on the Nefesh B'Nefesh YouTube channel, so you'll be able to access it whenever you want. And thank you again to everyone.
Have a great night. Have a great day, Nadav, in Australia, and see y'all later.
Thank you.
Tell us how the day turns out.